Hey guys, Matt Smith back here with you. Week 10 SEC preview today. I will start with a quick recap of last night's college football playoff rankings. Not so much my thoughts on the rankings themselves because they don't really matter that much at this point, but kind of my thoughts on the reaction to the rankings. So, just to review quickly, we have Georgia number one, Alabama number two, Michigan State at three, or Oregon does stay ahead of Ohio State. They are 4 and 5. Cincinnati comes in at six. Michigan 7, Oklahoma 8, Wake Forest 9, Notre Dame 10. I was a little surprised Oklahoma was as low as they were, but I thought they'd be 5 or 6 just based on some very close wins against teams with losing records. You have West Virginia, Kansas, Nebraska, one other one I'm not thinking of, Tulane. So their resume is just not complete at this point, but it doesn't matter because they have at number 11, at number 12, a home game against probably what will be a ranked Iowa State team by the time that rolls around, and then a Big 12 title game. So I think the Bear, Chris Felica, had mentioned last night that a 13-0 Oklahoma could get left out of the playoff. That's not happening. So they might not have a mulligan this year because they've screwed around so much in those wins against bad teams. But if they keep winning, they're fine, and it didn't matter whether they were 5, 6, 7, or 8 last night. Kind of the same with Cincinnati. I don't know what the big outcry was. If they were ahead of Ohio State by one or behind Ohio State by one, who cares? Ohio State was going to blow by them if they keep winning and beat Michigan State and beat Michigan in Ann Arbor and win a Big Ten title game. So it doesn't matter where they are at this point. If you're Cincinnati, I think the only new concern I saw was that 11-2 Alabama could be in play to still be ahead of the Bearcats. With Alabama getting the benefit of the doubt once again, being number 2, which it did surprise me a little bit. I thought Sparty would be number 2, still being an undefeated Power 5 team with some really good wins. That was not the case, as Alabama was not dinged too much for that close loss at A&M. So I think there is a scenario where another competitive loss to a number 1 Georgia team in the SEC title game could keep them ahead of Cincinnati. So I think that's the only new concern. But I think for Cincinnati, it's what we've talked about all along. They need Oklahoma to lose. They need Oregon to lose. They need probably just one team with 0 or 1 losses out of the Big Ten. You don't want Ohio State winning it at 12-1 and have Michigan State sitting there at 11-1 with a close loss in Columbus. Then you could get boxed out. So right now, I think it's pretty close to 50-50 for the Bearcats about whether they would get in or not at 13-0. But I don't really get why there was so much outcry last night just because of that number 6 ranking. We know what they have to do. They still need help, and that's how they get in. So. And just the reaction to the Alabama number, it's like, well, who would you rather play, Alabama or Cincinnati or Michigan State? Like, who cares? If Alabama's 8-4 and we had a 24-team playoff and Alabama played Cincinnati, I'd pick Alabama. I mean, they could lose a number of games over and over, and you'd still say they're a better team because they have better athletes. We've known that in February. We knew that in May. We knew that in August. Yeah, so they have 1 loss. If they lose again to Auburn by 3, are they all of a sudden, well, now Michigan State's better. But no, you'd still pick Alabama to beat them on a neutral field. So where's the line? I hate that argument. So that frustrated me. I think it was Chris Fowler talking about last night about who would you rather play. That the dumbest argument in sports. We know who the most talented teams are. We could have told you that after signing day every year. It's Alabama, it's Georgia, it's Ohio State. But so what? They need to actually win games. And that's the whole point of playing in a season. So that really kind of ticked me off last night, but that's par for the course when it comes to the reaction to these rankings. So again, the rankings themselves were fine. I had some issues farther down ballot, not super relevant at this point. Bowl games are not based on your CFP rankings. It's more about where you've been in recent years. So I don't know why Arkansas they weren't even ranked. So we'll say 10 spots behind number 17 Mississippi State, who lost to Memphis and who lost to LSU at home. I don't really get that when Arkansas's losses are all pretty respectable and they've beaten A&M. That seems weird to me. But I think if you had some head-to-head wins over peer schools like Mississippi State has in that cluster around 16-20, where they wanted NC State there, they wanted Kentucky there, Mississippi State beat both of them. So they kind of had a floor in terms of how far they could drop because of those head-to-head wins. So even if you have some bad losses, it's better to have those wins over your peer schools. And I think that's why Mississippi State was so much more ahead of Arkansas. I do think they rely way too much on head-to-head, particularly once teams start to have different number of losses. You can ding teams for bad losses. It's okay. They need to show up and play. And for teams like Mississippi State, you should never lose to Memphis. Losing to LSU at home right now, for what it's worth, that's a bad loss. So I was kind of surprised by how high they were. I thought they'd be ranked, but more in that 23-24 range. I thought Arkansas deserved to be higher, but not super relevant there. Just wanted to mention that because of the SEC flavor. of that aspect of the rankings. So, all right, I've spent way too much time on the rankings. Let's get into the games. We got 7 this week, 6 conference games. Ole Miss hosting Liberty. Vanderbilt, the final SEC team to not have their off week. They will do that on Saturday. So 13 teams in action and 7 total games. Let's start with that non-conference games. Liberty and Ole Miss. Hugh Freeze coming back to Oxford. First time since he was fired in July of 2017 in the wake of NCAA investigations, some personal off-field issues he was dealing with. So his first time back, Ole Miss about a 9.5-point favorite. And for the Rebels, they need to run the ball. They need to run the ball again, and they need to keep running the ball. I think the plan for Matt Corral is probably 20 to 25 passes or 20 to 25 dropbacks, perhaps. He's banged up. He was hurt coming into the Auburn game. He got more significantly hurt in the Auburn game. They got a big one with A&M next week, and you can beat Liberty by running the ball. That team lost to ULM. Despite their 7-2 record, they're no match for Ole Miss talent-wise. I think with Snoop Connor, Jerry Neely, and Henry Parrish, just run the ball 45, 50 times. Get out of here. And even though we will have potentially the top 2 quarterbacks going head-to-head in the 2022 NFL Draft, in Corral and Liberty's Malik Willis, along with the free storyline, you do have some intrigue there. But I think on the actual field between the lines, there should be an Ole Miss runaway, even in a bit of a sandwich spot. So I'll lay those 9.5 points. I think Ole Miss pulls away and is able to get some backups in as they get ready for a big game with A&M in Oxford next Saturday. Missouri, Georgia, the other early game, about a 38-point line. Crazy to see that number for an SEC conference game, but such is life right now with this Bulldogs defense and not allowing more than about 6 or 7 points a game. Missouri may not have Connor Bazelak, who got hurt last week against Vanderbilt. It might be backup Tyler Macon, who had to come into that game last week here in Nashville. For Georgia, maybe an emotional letdown spot just because the meat of their schedule was in October where they had the 2 rivalry games. They had 2 games with College Game Day being in town. So it was a busy month of October. Obviously, they ran it without much difficulty. But if you're going to have a bit of a letdown spot, maybe it's this week playing a bad Missouri team, noon kick. So it's possible. I don't think Missouri's still going to score more than 10 points or so in this game, whether Bazelak plays or not. So it's a matter of, can Georgia continue to expose this bad Missouri defense, who didn't appear to take many strides last week against Vanderbilt, despite having the week off prior to that. So I think Georgia can just run the ball, control the clock, easily get in the 40s. And then you're probably asking Missouri to get multiple scores, and I just don't think anyone can do that right now against Georgia without some really dynamic weapons, and Missouri does not have that, despite Tyler Beatty being a really solid back. So I'm just not going to take any points against Georgia, regardless of the number right now. I did it with Arkansas earlier in October and got burnt. So I rolled with them the past few weeks. They've covered most of the time. So I'll lay that 38 points and take Georgia to roll to 9-0 with very little struggle. Late afternoon games. Unfortunately, the 2 best games are in the same TV window here. You got Auburn A&M on CBS. 2 very even teams, 2 very sound fundamental teams, 2 very well-coached teams. So I have a hard time seeing this game getting far out of hand one way or the other. I think it's probably a 1-score game throughout. 2 interesting quarterbacks who are both playing at a high level with a lot of confidence, but very different styles, of course. Auburn's Bo Nix being at his best when he's outside the pocket, making plays with both his arms and his legs out there. Zach Calzada, of course, likes to do his damage through the pocket, like we saw against Alabama. Not as much of a mobile guy compared to Nick. So an interesting matchup. 2 pretty good defenses, some interesting skill position players with Tank Bigsby and Jarquez Hunter for Auburn, going against Isaiah Spiller, Devin Achane, Nia Smith for A&M. So again, I just don't see this game really getting. I see a 10-point lead being the absolute maximum for either team in this game. Probably comes down to a mistake in the 4th quarter. Despite being 4-0 all time in Kyle Field, I think the streak finally ends for Auburn on Saturday. I'm going to call for A&M to win it. Line's about 4.5. That's not at all a strong play on either side for me. I hate taking a team to cover but not win outright at a number that small, so I'll just lay the 4.5, say A&M wins by 7, 27-20, 31-24, but a competitive game. And again, it would stun me if the result is pretty one-sided. I think it's a back and forth, fairly low scoring for the most part game. But I do think A&M pulls it out to keep SEC West title hopes alive. They'll need Auburn to win the Iron Bowl, but then tiebreakers could break in the Aggies' favor if they keep winning. So, fun game. Look forward to that one Saturday in College Station. Concurrently, about half an hour after that, we'll have Mississippi State and Arkansas. I don't think Arkansas can try and replicate their game plan from last year, where it was just, play in that zone, tackle the catch, force Mississippi State to go 14, 15 plays down the field. I think we've seen a nice growth from that Bulldogs offense this year in that unless you're a super talented, fast, athletic defense like Alabama was, like LSU was at that time of that game in September, you're going to struggle to slow down this Bulldogs offense. And I think Arkansas, despite being very well coached, being very fundamentally sound, they're not overly athletic. So I could see Mississippi State doing to Arkansas kind of what it did to Kentucky last week, where it got, I think, 31 they had total points. So I think it will take the Hogs offense probably getting into the 30s to win this game. They need to stretch the field. Mississippi State very good against the run, but they have been vulnerable against the pass. We saw that in the Alabama blowout a few weeks back. So this is a Treylon Burks game. If KJ Jefferson is on point with some of his deep shots, I think they can hit a couple with Burks, use Jefferson in the run game to diversify that, to try and balance that really nasty Mississippi State front seven. So really fun matchup here. I think Arkansas pulls it out, being rested, having a week off in addition to an FCS game the week before. Mississippi State's been playing SEC games the last 3 weeks, some physical battles with Alabama and Kentucky. So I think a situational edge for Arkansas. Playing at home, should be a good crowd there in Fayetteville. I think the Hogs get it done and wrap up a trip to a bowl in what should be a pretty good battle there between the two teams predicted to finish last in the SEC West, but they both turned out to be pretty pleasant surprises this year. To the night window, 3 games, LSU-Alabama. First time not on CBS since 2006, hard to believe. But when you face planted as badly as LSU has for the past year and a half, this game is not going to be that attractive for CBS. It's another 4-touchdown spread like it was last year. I don't think LSU can expose what we think is the weakness right now of the Alabama defense is that secondary, which has been susceptible to some coverage busts against A&M, against Tennessee, and without Kayshon Boutte, with a pretty shaky offensive line still, I struggle to think that Max Johnson is going to be able to have the time to kind of pick apart that defense and create those chunk plays to maybe give LSU a shot to keep this game competitive. And for Alabama's offense, with John Mechie back in the fold after some struggles kind of in early October, did not play well against A&M. He's been really, really good against State, against Tennessee. I think that offense is pretty locked in. I think they shouldn't have much trouble getting into the 40s. And with that, I think I will feel comfortable about laying the 28.5, 29 points. No mercy is going to be shown at Orgeron, despite him being heading out the door by Nick Saban in Alabama. They remember what happened 2 years ago in Tuscaloosa when LSU came to town. So if they get a chance to keep their foot on the gas in the third and fourth quarter, I think they will do that. So I will take Alabama to cover, once again, a really large number against LSU. Tennessee-Kentucky, fun game in Lexington. I think this matchup kind of favors Tennessee. I think they can stretch the field against Kentucky's defense, kind of like Mississippi State did last week. Kentucky, again, they're pretty good against the run, but they've been vulnerable to the pass. That's what Tennessee wants to do. I really like Josh Heupel as an in-game play caller. He's shown he can do that with success in the SEC this year. And relying on history, it's kind of fickle in terms of, do I rely on it here? Do I want to just say it doesn't matter? These players wear diapers for the last time this situation happened in this series. But I am going to rely on history here in this spot. And that's when Kentucky is supposed to beat Tennessee. They generally do not beat Tennessee. We saw it, I think, 2 years ago. Tennessee went up there. That was the Lynn Bowden year for Kentucky. Not a great Tennessee team. They were starting to play well, but they held on late to beat Kentucky in Lexington. 3 years ago, Kentucky was a top 15 team. Went to Neyland to play a 5-7 Vols team, and Tennessee popped them pretty good. So historically, when all the pressure is on Kentucky, which is a rarity in the history of this series, the Wildcats really don't always answer the bell. So with an improving Tennessee team, a pretty confident Tennessee team coming off a pretty good performance against Alabama, plus a week off, I say the Vols go into Lexington and win that game and get to 5-4 and put themselves in a very great position to get to 7-5 by season end and maybe 8 with a bowl. That's a heck of a year one for Josh Heupel, given what he inherited. And finally, Florida, South Carolina. What is going on in Gainesville? Dan Mullen's canceling media availability. Is he on the hot seat now? Well, he is if he loses to South Carolina. I can tell you that because that's a bad Gamecocks team, a disgusting offense. That line's about 18, 19 points. So I think if Florida is dialed in, and maybe they're just a decent team that's run into Alabama, that's run into Georgia, gave away a game against Kentucky on special teams, or maybe they are broken. I think we'll find out on Saturday night. If they're still dialed in, they win this game big, they probably cover. But South Carolina is going to fight. They play hard for Shane Beamer. They're not very good, but the crowd will be into it. It's at night. So while I think South Carolina is going to struggle to probably get more than 14 to 17 points against the Florida defense that did play pretty well last week against Georgia, I just don't know if Florida's interest, if their focus will be there enough to run this up enough to cover. So I'm going to begrudgingly take the points with South Carolina, even as bad as they are. I'm going to call for a 28-13 Florida win. That'll be a cover. Ugly game. South Carolina maybe threatens for a bit, but I think Florida rights the ship at least to some extent. Whether that's enough for them to stay hot and navigate a pretty soft November schedule, 4-0, that's TBD. But I think they do at least get right up in Columbia against a bad Gamecocks team on Saturday night. So that will wrap up the SEC slate. Quickly go through the national games here of note. Friday night's an interesting one. If you know the Wells Crowder story, the red bandana game at Boston College. Wells Crowder, he lost his life on September 11th, 2001, a former Boston College player, athlete, usually one game a year. They wear kind of red bandanas, all the crowd does. The uniforms generally have kind of a red bandana color for the numbers. It's a really cool scene. They always will tell the story during the game. Definitely read up on that before the game. But that's your Friday night game of note, Virginia Tech at Boston College in their red bandana game up in Chestnut Hill. Then Saturday early, we have Ohio State and Nebraska. Nebraska, I believe that's 8 straight losses now that have been by 8 points or less. So that would be a heck of an accomplishment if they keep it within one score against the Buckeyes on Saturday. I think they can. I mean, their offense is still pretty decent with Adrian Martinez. Defense is solid. And we just don't know if this Buckeyes team was just capitalizing on a terrible midseason schedule and Penn State was able to expose them, or if they are going to get it together and just pop Nebraska, and they just need to shake some rust off last week against the Nittany Lions. So tough one to call in that 15-point spread, but given the way Nebraska's played against good teams this year, I think I'd take those points. I think they'll hang around with the Buckeyes, land some punches, maybe Ohio State by 10 or so, but a decent game, I think, in Lincoln. And Nebraska loses this game that will make 6 losing seasons in their past 7 years. Hard to believe for a program that was at the top of the sport just 20, 25 years ago. Wake Forest at North Carolina is also early. That's your noon ABC game, not a conference game. Remember that. This is part of their wacky home and home they scheduled because they were going to go 7 years without playing each other. And for teams 90 miles apart that used to be annual competitors, they didn't want to do that because the ACC needs to get rid of divisions, but they won't do it. So this does not count in the conference standings, but for Wake Forest, obviously, if they want to have any hopes of a playoff spot, they can't lose. But a fun game in Chapel Hill, Carolina trying to bounce back after playing okay last week at Notre Dame, but still making some kind of silly mistakes to force the Irish to be able to pull away in the second half there. So fun game there. Should be a lot of points. I'll definitely take the over in that one. I think that could be a 45-42, 49-45 type game. So fun one in Chapel Hill between the Deacs and the Tar Heels, but again, not technically an ACC game. Not a whole lot else in that window. Army and Air Force, CBS, I believe that's an 11:30 Eastern kick. That game is in Dallas. So not on campus, so probably not the atmosphere you'd like if it were in West Point or Colorado Springs, but still Army and Air Force. Always kind of a special game when a couple service academies get together. Late afternoon's pretty good. The Giant Killers, the Boilermakers, taking another shot at a top 5 team. They got Ohio State a couple years ago. They got Iowa a couple weeks back. In comes number 3 Michigan State to West Lafayette on Saturday. Boilers off a nice win at Nebraska last week. Michigan State coming down off the high of that classic against Michigan last week. So definitely a tricky spot for them. Real good test of their maturity, their focus. They're the better team, but Purdue's pretty dangerous. If you have David Bell healthy and locked in, he's one of the best, probably the best receiver in the Big Ten outside of Olave and Wilson at Ohio State. So Kenneth Walker and David Bell on the same field. That should be a lot of fun. So good one there in the Big Ten. Baylor and TCU, first game without Gary Patterson for the Horned Frogs since 2000 after he was let go last weekend. So again, kind of a sandwich spot for the Bears, much like Ole Miss, as I mentioned earlier, coming off the Texas win for Baylor last week. They'll get Oklahoma a week from Saturday. Kind of a rivalry game. Those teams have had some bad blood in the past between the Horned Frogs and the Bears. So another test of that maturity of a Baylor team who's still got a shot at the college football playoff and a Big 12 title, but really don't want to take a loss against TCU. So what kind of state will the Horned Frogs be in? We don't know. We'll find out on Saturday after a weird week for them. Navy Notre Dame, kind of like the Boston College thing I was talking about. Read up on the history there, why they play every year, why Notre Dame continues to play them despite having to deal with the option every year and all that. Just some really cool history going back to World War II. Again, I'm sure they'll touch on that in the game, but a little bit beyond just the actual game when Navy and Notre Dame play. That's pretty cool. Oklahoma State at West Virginia. Mountaineers going for a second straight home upset. Knocked off Iowa State last week. Oklahoma State is slim, about a 3-point favorite. They go up to Morgantown, also a 3:30 kick. NC State, Florida State, kind of an interesting matchup in the ACC. Both teams starting to play a little bit better. Florida State probably should have beaten Clemson last week, had that wacky non-cover on the last play of the game. NC State beat Louisville to bounce back after the Miami loss, so good game there in the ACC Atlantic. Primetime window, Iowa Northwestern, that's kind of gross. Two very bad offenses. Good game in the Mountain West, Boise State, Fresno State. I believe that's also a 7 o'clock kickoff there between two conference title contenders. Indiana, Michigan, another bad Big Ten game. That's your Fox primetime game. We'll touch on that one in Best Bets. ABC primetime is Oregon, Washington. Good rivalry game. Are the Huskies up for this one? I got a nice road win at Stanford last week. Offense still really struggling, but that's a pretty good defense. So a fun matchup there between Jimmy Lake's defense and Anthony Brown and Joe Moorhead in that Oregon offense. Of course, that crazy comment by Jimmy Lake earlier this week that Washington doesn't consider Oregon a rival on the recruiting trail because they go up against higher academic schools or whatever they said, and USC and Stanford and Notre Dame, whatever. Really weird, silly comment, but it had some fuel to the fire for what's a pretty good rivalry up in the northwest part of the country. So Ducks and Huskies in Seattle, your ABC primetime game. Texas, Iowa State going in the Big 12. Longhorns pretty much out of the Big 12 title picture after that another collapse last week at Baylor. Iowa State still in it, but they can't afford another loss here. Great game last year in Austin. Iowa State pulled out at the end to get to the Big 12 title game, so Longhorns looking for revenge. But can they finish off a game this time? That's the big test. If they do happen to lead in the second half, is this team mature enough to finally close one? Because they sure as heck haven't been for most of the season, dropping those 3 games in a row, blowing big leads to Oklahoma, Oklahoma State, and Baylor. After dark schedule, not a whole lot. USC, Arizona State, two teams kind of free-falling here. Both Arizona State's still in the division title race, I suppose. They'll need some help from Utah, but they've lost a couple in a row now, so don't know what happened last week at home against Washington State, but a chance to get right against the USC team. It has Jackson Dart back, but lost their star receiver, Drake London, last week. So, as usual, craziness in Los Angeles with the Trojans, and very unpredictable about which team will show up in Tempe on Saturday night. And a couple Mountain West games, San Diego State and Hawaii on the islands. San Jose State and Nevada. Get to look at Carson Strong, one of the top quarterback prospects probably in the draft as well if you're up late watching Nevada. And big game in Conference USA, UTSA and UTEP for first place in that conference. USA Western Division, they'll do battle in El Paso late night. So that wraps up the national look around. Best bets last week, 2-2-1. Got bit by the FSU Clemson play. I did give it out at 10, so it's only a tie, not a loss. So 2-2-1 for me last week. Now 25-19-1 for the year. So still above water, holding steady. And we're going to try this 5-pack this week. We got Ole Miss minus 9.5 against Liberty. Again, I think they can just run, and that Liberty run defense is not going to be able to hold up. And they'll pull away. Worry a bit about a backdoor cover there, but I'm good with the 9.5. Northwestern plus 12 against Iowa. Just two bad offenses. Iowa's the better team. I think Northwestern will struggle to score, but likewise, I think Iowa will struggle as well. So maybe 17-10 Iowa win or something, but I'll take the 12 points at home for Northwestern, who's been a pain in the butt for Iowa. Historically in the last 10 or 12 years under Pat Fitzgerald. Michigan 19.5 against Indiana. That's too low. Indiana might be the worst team in the Big Ten right now. Michigan coming off the frustration of last week in East Lansing. They'll curb stop the Hoosiers. Lay those 19.5. Baylor TCU, touched on that one. Only 6.5. I like that number. It is kind of uncertain about what TCU team will show up after a weird week of losing their head coach. But I like the makeup of this Baylor team. I like that number at 6.5. I think they handle this sandwich spot well and go into Fort Worth and win by more than one score. And Wisconsin minus 12 at Rutgers, kind of like the Iowa Northwestern line, probably not a ton of points. So maybe counterintuitive, I said take the points in a low-scoring game with Iowa Northwestern. I'm going to lay the points here, but I think that Wisconsin defense is playing so well right now. I have a hard time seeing this struggling Rutgers offense getting more than probably 10, 13 points. And I think Wisconsin, if you get to 24, 25 points, that's probably enough to get a cover on the road there. So I'll lay the 12 with the Badgers. And that will wrap it up today. So thanks so much for watching, guys. Please please subscribe to the channel. Reach out to me on Twitter and follow me there at Matt Smith CFB. It's November, guys. It's going to be fun. A lot of twists and turns still to come. I'll be back on Sunday, of course, to wrap it up with the Week 10 recap. And thanks so much for watching, guys, and I'll talk to y'all soon.